Obviously, we're doing Shabtai Tzvi and everything that goes along with that, which unfortunately is always inappropriate for the 3 weeks. It's the most embarrassing episode in Jewish history, probably. Everybody got it wrong. Everybody. And we're going to be talking about that. Tonight we start talking about what I call theological bubble. It's not my expression, but you understand the meaning of that. And as I say before, the Jewish people certainly got egg on their face in the 17th century and afterwards. And the question is why? And that's something we're going to start to be talking about tonight. So let's begin at the beginning by considering what exactly is Judaism. And it's hard to answer that question. It's a monotheistic religion, but that ain't all it is, right? No, they believe in one God. That's not the sum total of Judaism. Otherwise, we just say, okay, we don't have to do anything. You just believe one God. That's what they call deists, okay? In addition, Judaism is, as I always like to call it, a nomian, as opposed to an antinomian religion. It's a religion of laws. My God, do we have laws? And customs and regulations and rules more than anybody else, except maybe the Hindus and 30 or 40 other religions in Asia. But in the West, we got more than anybody else. And that's certainly true, although that's not all that Judaism is either. One thing we're not is a religion with a very precise theology. Jesus has never been even attempting, as far as I know, to be theological, to get official and exact definitions of what is God, what is heaven and earth, what happens to you when you die, what really happens when you die, what is the soul, what is Yetzer Tov, Yetzer Hara, the things you read in the Bible, which parts are true, meaning literally so, which parts are not literally so. You think, well, everybody knows God doesn't have a hand. There were people who held that God has a hand. The Rambam condemns them. You understand? It's not true what you say. Who's got it right today? The Hasidim or the Misnagdim? The Ashkenaz or the Sephardim? The Lubavitch or everybody else? Which, who's got it right? And, and of course everybody says my way. There's no one agreed upon definition of core theological issues in Judaism, and this is nowhere more evident than in the Talmud. Anybody with the slightest familiarity with the Agadah, and half of the Gemara is halach and half the Gemara isn't, and the part of the Gemara, the entire Talmud. I'm talking about the Mishnah, the Tosefta, the Mechilta, the Sifra, the Bavli, the Yerushalmi, the Medrash, the all that stuff. You always find on every page, what happens after you die? Reb so-and-so says this happens, someone says the exact opposite. What does God eat for breakfast? One says this, one says that, the other one says he doesn't eat breakfast, someone says, oh yes he does. You see? That's very typical of the rabbinic literature. And obviously, whoever edited it and put it down on paper that we studied today was conveying to us a multiplicity of theological perspectives, which means that there's no one. Actually, it has been a strength of Judaism, I think, and more importantly, it was a historic necessity, because long ago, Jews lost their state, their temple, their priesthood, their independence, their geographical contiguity. They're scattered all over the world, without any ability to communicate with each other for many centuries, in radically different cultural contexts. Some live in the Arab world, some live in the Christian world, some in the world of hocus pocus of voodoo, and some the opposite. And some spoke Yiddish and some did not. They spoke a completely different dialect. And so what held them together? You understand? What held them together? And the answer is they obviously had to have certain commonalities, but also you had to have a certain amount of flexibility. If everybody insists on the Hasidic way, you're not going to hold everybody in. If everybody insists on the Rambam way, you're not going to hold everybody in. If everybody insists on the non-Rambam way, you're not going to hold everybody in. And so on and so forth. If everybody says you have to do like Sam Srei Hirsch, or the Maral, or Rav Dessler, or whatever, it ain't going to work for everybody. And so anyway, Judaism has never been, we fight a lot about rules, we fight a lot less about theology. You just better know that. Now there are several basic trends of Jewish thought which have developed down the millennia. I think that's true. Meaning, with anybody writing down, these are the beliefs or the theological principles of Judaism. This is very different, by the way, than the Christians, right? Christianity, coming from a Hellenistic perspective, they downplayed the importance of laws, but they upplayed the importance of theological principles. And so, in Christianity, there are huge battles and wars when a lot of people are killed, whether Jesus has a knuckle or just seems to, whether he had a mother or didn't really have a mother, whether he had hair or didn't. I'm serious. Was there a man and a God? Was there a man / God? All these kind of, which in Judaism made no sense. So there put and if you didn't follow the correct theology and adhere, for example, to the Nicene Creed or some other creed, you were in big trouble. You got killed. And Judaism never exactly developed that until very recently. So anyway, but there are several basic trends of Jewish thought which have developed down the millennium. One of them, obviously, is the chosen people. I think that's obvious. Correct? You have in the Torah the idea that God created the world and give the Torah to the Jews and all the rest of it. Oops, watch it. Give the Torah to the Jews. They didn't give it to someone else. It's called the chosen people. So right off the bat, it's a core element, popular or not, of the Jewish religion belief. Problem is, if we're a chosen people, why are we in such a miserable exile? If we're chosen people, we should be living, let your fantasy run away with you, But I should have not a small place in Rechavi, a big place in Rechavi with an elevator and, 4 bathrooms and 3 cars, Why aren't we all living in the high and the hog? Why do Jewish people, especially years ago, don't have a country, downtrodden, and all the rest of it? And of all of this emerges, not clearly, but very distinctly, the Messiah idea, the Mashiach. Now, the word is not used in the Tanakh exactly, and nowhere is this laid out with precision, but different Nevi'im talk about aspects of some future, better world. Now it stinks. Why is it sick now? That's already a question that you can answer. We've sinned. We blew it. We lost everything once we had a kingdom, but we're going to get it back. Right? We say this all the time, you don't even realize it. You understand? And to be perfectly honest, it's a little bit interesting that this week happens coincidentally to be the parsha of the great messianic predictions in the Chumash. There's only one parsha I know of, and that's Balak, where Bilam, we talked about this morning in place, Bilam, as we all know, was not able to curse the Jews, but at the end, he says to Balak, let me tell you what's going to happen in the future. Isn't that right? I'll tell you, Ba'achris hayamin. And what does he say? Erena v'lo atash, erena v'lo karav. I see it. It's not happening close, but I see it down the line. Darach kochav miYaakov, become Shevet miYisrael. A star will birth forth from Jacob and a staff from Israel. U'mochas pasei Moav. Now bust Moav, because he was talking to the king of Moav, who was criticizing because he didn't curse the Jews. He said, I'm not going to give you any money. So he said, oh, really? Oh, good. I'll tell you what's happening to Moab. It'll be destroyed. The karkar kol b'nei Shes. And that this figure, the star coming out of Jacob, will dominate the human race because he will karkar kol b'nei Shes. He will rule and dominate the descendants of Shes. That's us. That's the human race. Right? Need I remind you, Cain and Abel, that didn't work out? Abel got killed on day 1. Cain got basically wiped out, we believe, with the flood, 99.9%. And the rest of the human race comes from Shes. So if this, whoever he is, this Kocha Yaakov, is coming forth and going to dominate B'nai Shes, that's like a certain statement that something or somebody will someday in the future. And by the way, this wasn't even a Jew talking. This was Bilam talking King of Moab. But we read it all the time in Parsha. True? So now that I told you, I pay attention to the laning this week in Shul. And he goes on to say, V'hoya Edom Yeresha, that this person or whatever will dominate Edom, which to people in time of the Talmud was Rome. Right? And even talks about Tzim Miyad Kitim, that invasion fleets will come from other places. Isn't that right? And so he portrays some charismatic figure far in the future who will be a violent individual. Right? Doesn't say he'll come as a Prince of Peace and spread peace and love, and when the moon is in the 7th house. They won't do any of that. He'll come and bring down destruction on them, not on us. And again, it's not clear. Again, it's very unclear, which is why Rashi says it means this, Ramban says it means this, Uncle says something else. So this is a basic feature of this idea. That it's a messianic idea, but it's not clear. When you get to the prophets, the Nevi'im, Zechariah, Yeshaya, Yecheskel, a couple other places, particularly in the book of Daniel, you get a lot of different and competing images of what this messianic process or figure is going to be like. Just a few different images emerge. The regal and just king, right? Oh, he'll be Prince of Peace. He'll be able to judge just by smelling. He'll cause the end of war. Then you have the suffering servant in chapter 53 of Isaiah, of Yeshayahu. In the Yaskal Avdi, which many of the Mepharshim, even though they would say it in Christian debates, is a messianic sort of thing. A suffering servant that will undergo vicarious suffering on behalf of the Jews. You have a mighty warrior. Right? I just told you. Karkar Kol B'nai Sheis. You have a superhuman. Now we're getting on sticky ground over here. But there are indications. This person will be not just a human, but a superhuman. So which is it? Problem is, when you get in Nevi'im, it's never exact. If you don't know what I'm talking about, chances are you don't listen at the end of services on Shabbos morning when they do something called Anu Zemiris, which was composed by one of the Hasidic Ashkenaz back in the 1200s, 13th century, in which what does he say? It's Anu Zemiris Shir Meriki Nafshi Avecha Lo Das Kol Rosa Hine Dab Milchada. I'm thinking about you. I'm yearning for you. Al Kina Daber Chonich Boshim Shimcha Yadab Yedidos. Asapra Adam Chavlo Yidatich. I imagine what you're like. But I never know what you're like. And he goes on to say that you've been described God in many different ways, and none of them are exactly right. This is what you're reciting when you do Adam Zemiras. Isn't that right? He says, how's it go? Hincha Echa B'chol Demyonos. Sometimes you're described as a man of war, like in the Oz Yashir. Sometimes you got it described as an old man of the day of judgment, like the book of Daniel, when God is described as a man in a old man in a long white atikim, in a long white robe, with a white beard. He's Zikna B'yom Din, Bachrus B'yom Krov, Kish M'chol Zerov. In other words, we can't get any exactness out of all this. We get glimpses, pieces. Hence the problem with Messianism. And to add to this, there have always been and always will be in Jewish circles, because we are a large group, the elite conceptions and the mass conceptions. Right? The scholars and the biggies, the ones that, for example, know the different passages in the Talmud, but they can put them together in such a way, and then the average man and woman on the street, or sitting in the synagogue, hearing the Haftorah or the Parsha of the week with the aid of a Targum, and hearing all kind of wild things. If you happen to hear the Targum of a guy named Onkelos, okay, he's very careful to tamp all this down. If you hear another one of these Targums, the Mashiach will come, he's going to fly in a spaceship, going to blow up the Goyim, going to take over the world, and people will be resurrected on the spot, all kinds of things like that. So there are the elite conceptions and the mass conceptions. You can never get rid of this, because it is a fact, I would assert, that you always have a problem, the masses are asses. After all, how many people a few years ago believed in the talking fish in Muncie? Yeah, now, you don't follow. Now, or the lady back in Israel, wasn't that long ago, she got a diplomat that said, vote for Avad Yossi's party in the elections. Right? We forget these things because they go with somebody. What I'm trying to say is, people get traction no matter how crazy it is. Now, this explains why we've had a problem almost from day one with false messiahs. If you want to be historical about it, Josephus, and I mentioned this in the history series when we did it a couple of months ago, in the time of Josephus, he records, and remember, he lived in the time of Churban Bayis Sheni, an entire wave, I remember it's like a dozen or more, of people in Judea in what the Gemara refers to as the 40 years before the Churban, when things were real bad under the Romans, and the Jews in Judea couldn't stand it, and what was necessary was a great deal of patience and turning the other cheek, which is what the rabbis recommended. But the young people, for perfectly understandable reasons, didn't want to hear from this, and they couldn't stand the presence of the Romans. And the fascist collaborationist regime of the Herodians and the corrupt high priests, that's what was going on in Israel at that time. But what do you do? How do you get rid of the Romans? Everybody knew that they were all powerful, which they were in those days. The Roman army was by far the best. And how's a puny little group like the Jews in a small corner of the Middle East going to be able to take them on? And so you have the paradox of the irresistible force versus the immovable object. And the result is that people step forward during this period. I'm talking about the 10s, 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s CE, after the year 1 or 10 or so, 20, let's say. And a person would pop up here and there, and he would say the following: Enochanami, you can't defeat the Roman Empire al derech hateva. You can't defeat the Romans by regular power, but you can defeat them shalo al pi derech hateva. Right? Through miracles, the hand of God is not too weak to do anything. After all, doesn't Judah Maccabee, for example, constantly tell the troops in the book of Maccabees, don't be hemmed in by the fact we're outnumbered 20 to 1 or 100 to 1, because victory belongs to God? So are you of little faith that you don't believe in me? When God told me last night, or yesterday at breakfast, that I am the hero sent from above. And by the way, a lot of these people just get over this. When I say false messiahs, I mean they're false in that they're not the Mashiach. Doesn't necessarily mean that they were phonies and charlatans. A lot of these people ended up believing their own stuff. It's not only the French who had Joan of Arcs. We have plenty of Joan of Arcs. They believe their own stuff for whatever reason. And so they get carried away. And each one of these false Mashiachs got traction. Josephus, I remember, records a guy who said that I had a vision, we're all going to jump off the walls of Jerusalem and fly to Rome like Peter Pan and bomb them. And a bunch of people jumped off the walls of Jerusalem and they died. And another guy, remains vivid in my memory, said, follow me into the Mediterranean Sea. If you got to be like Nachshon ben Aminadov. The Chazal say the water was up to here, and then because he had a moon, it split. So they went deep in the water and they drowned. You see? And other similar kinds of factors, because you always do this thing, oh, you're not from, you don't believe. What's wrong with you? It's a problem with your emunah. And so consequently, you had a whole string of these. The Christian religion, if there's anything to it, if there was a person named Jesus of Nazareth, would fit very well in this period before the temple was destroyed of the false messiahs. I'm not saying he did exist or didn't exist, because Josephus doesn't mention him, which is interesting. But nevertheless, it was such a period. Now, they were all phonies, and not only that, but they kept people's hopes up and they helped stir the popular feeling to the point, perfectly understandably, that they rose and revolted against Rome. But of course, what was the end? One total mapala. Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, Jerusalem was destroyed, the Jewish state was destroyed. We've never recovered till today. And so all of a sudden, the idea of a Mashiach figure, a false Messiah, it turns out to be not something piquant to study or to talk about, becomes something demonic, as they call it, meaning something that has the potential to cause a big churban in Klal Yisrael. And they have. Right? They have. Now, each one of these guys got killed one way or the other in the time of Josephus, but sects formed around them and around others. The style of rabbinical literature, I'm talking about Chazal, is to kill by silence. We do not know, we never will know, how many false Mashiach popped up after destruction of Beis Hamikdash when the Josephus types were gone and the only people left were the rabbis. And they were the ones doing the writing. And therefore, if this guy or that guy or this lady or that lady claimed to be a messianic figure, they don't even talk about it. The best thing you can do is let it disappear from history. You get it? That's their approach. But you can tell a little bit. I remember there's a Mishnah or places like that who says, I don't want to daven for the Amud unless I'm wearing white or gold or things like this. These are sectarian groups which usually have some kind of messianic basis. And they were promising, of course, to rebuild the base of Hamikdash, kick the Romans out in some miraculous way, and all the rest of it. The only one we know that got traction among the rabbis was Bar Kochba, which of course turned out to be a complete disaster. Right? And only because Rabbi Akiva backed him. So, we did this last summer. Rabbi Akiva backed him, others did not back him, but it is what it is. It was a big business. But look how hundreds of thousands of Jews rallied to the flag and fought the Romans under his leadership, which means that the Messianic idea, very powerful. It's a button you press with the Jewish people, and you get something when you press that button. Hence, it's very dangerous. Right? Don't press unless you know what you're doing, which you don't. And so, various sects form after the destruction of the Second Temple. They've come and gone. Most of them are not around anymore. These are things that don't come into rabbinic literature except in a very tangential way. What I mean by that is, most of you will have no idea what I'm talking about. We think of Mishnah and the Gemara, the regular rabbinic literature. There's a parallel literature that goes along also, which is semi-Kabbalistic and semi-nuts, more than semi-nuts. And these are midrashim that didn't exactly get into the medrash, but they're floating midrashim out there in a sort of, what shall I say, peripheral manner. If you ever get Eisenstein's Odes and Midrashim, you can see some of these things. They're not exactly Midrashim, and then on the other hand, they're old and they're out there. There's a whole parallel literature. I'll just give you an example, one of them, although it's not exactly this. Toldos Yeshu, maybe you've heard of that book, right? Which purports falsely to be the story of Jesus, which it isn't, but it's been believed by Jews for a long time. And it's from the 300s or something, from the time of the Amoraim. We can trace it back, possibly even older. And so, and by the way, he's flying through the air and doing all kind of magic tricks and things like that. These kinds of phenomena will always catch some groups of Jews. And they'll be, sort of like caught in the snares. There was tremendous confusion, and there still is, about Daniel's prediction of the four kingdoms. It's very clear, and the Jews and the Chazal also pinned a lot of hope on the famous foretelling of the future that you find in the book of Daniel. Right? When Nebuchadnezzar sees a statue with a head of gold, and then comes silver, then comes the bronze and iron, and he's told over there that these are four kingdoms that will come, and then will come a little stone and destroy it. That's the Mashiach, that's the Jewish people. At least that seems to be the usual understanding of it. And so in the time of the Gemara, they were absolutely convinced that the first kingdom is Bavel. In fact, it says in the book of Daniel says to Nebuchadnezzar, "Onto Resha Dehava, you're the head of gold." It was pretty clear to them that afterwards comes Persia, because in history the Persians took over after the Babylonian Empire. It was fairly clear in the time of the Gemara that the third one was Greece, which of course Alexander the Great and his successors took over the Persian Empire. And it was fairly clear in the time of the Gemara that the next one was Rome. Problem is, Rome came and went, nothing happened. You understand? When you read in the time of the Tanoim, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Shmuel, people like that, they're absolutely convinced that it'll be Bavel, Paras, Yavan, and then Edom. When Edom goes down the tubes, then comes the Mashiach. But Edom went down the tubes, the Western Roman Empire, here you see the two halves of the Roman Empire, Western Roman Empire went down tubes in the 400s. So where's the Mashiach? The opposite happened. Christianity got strong and persecuted Jews in an unprecedented way. So then you can say, well, the Eastern Roman Empire is still going on, And that was around in one form or another for another 1,000 years. So you could continue to make that kind of claim. So throughout the Middle Ages, you say, Edom is not totally gone. Even though by the 1300s, the Byzantine Empire was about that big. But nevertheless, it's Rome, which it was, until 1453 when the Turks destroyed it. And still nothing happened, although plenty of people in the 15th century, in the time of the Trumas Hadeshen, were waiting that when Constantinople falls and the Turks take it over, is the coming of the Mashiach, because that's the end of Edom. But it wasn't. Consequently, you have to do like with the GPS, recalculating. You understand? And what you end up doing is say, well, the usual way is to say like this. The third one is Greece and Rome. The fourth one is another one. You understand? There are two visions in the book of Daniel. You can look this. This is child's play. I'm not telling you anything fancy over here. You do it in a second. There are two dreams in the book of Daniel. One is in the second chapter. That's when Nebuchadnezzar has a dream about the statue with the four elements. And then there's one in the seventh chapter, I think, where Daniel has the dream of the four monsters. Which, hence, the number 4 is of great significance in Jewish lore, right? I do this for fun at the Seder, ever since then, everybody's darshaning. I'll give you an example. We have 4 imahos: Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah. Sarah is Keneged Bavel. Rivka, and it's up to you to figure out how it goes. Sarah is Keneged Bavel. Rivka is Keneged Paras. Leah is Yavan, and Rachel, I guess, would be Edom, or something like that. And where's the Mashiach? And so if you're constantly recalibrating, it kind of throws you off your equilibrium. The Jewish people were definitely thrown off the equilibrium when it comes to speculation about the future, and that's not good, and that's not healthy. Moreover, what happened after the fall of the Roman Empire was the rise of the Arab Empire, the Muslim Empire. Look how big that was, much bigger than the Roman Empire. And then people started saying this wasn't predicted. So where does that come from? Until the consensus forms on people like Ibn Ezra and the others, no, the Muslims are the fourth beast. You understand? The third one is this, and when the Muslims go down, then the Mashiach is coming. Ken's on, no way of knowing. But I'm trying to show you how they're constantly trying to connect the well-known prophecies, or what they thought well-known, with the Metzias in life, which didn't work out to be so neat. Because the rise of these empires and the fall of the Roman Empire did not result in not only did it not result in a Mashiach coming, but in a drastic decline in the civil rights of the Jews. Not many people know, but ever since the Emperor Caracalla in the early 200s, the Jews had complete and total civil rights in the Roman Empire. He made them all citizens. This is just interesting. He's the son of Septimius Severus, if that means anything. And Caracalla is a famous. He for some reason, like the Jews, he gave him complete and total civil rights. When the Christians take over in the beginning of the Middle Ages, the Jews lose all their civil rights. When the Muslims take over the rest of the world, they lose all their civil rights. They become the dhimmis, the downtrodden minorities. And so it's the opposite of what people expected. And yet, paradoxically, the decline in Jewish status could not help but intensify Messianic longings. Because if things got worse and worse, then it's got to be Ikvas to the Mashiach. It's got to be the Chevli Mashiach. It's got to be the pre-Messianic era. Because how can it be? So this takes us to the first round of what we can trace in the Middle Ages and what we call rabbinic literature, Torah literature as we call it, and try to get some kind of handle on all this. And what emerges is 2 broad streams, A and B. One, to dumb it down, is the Gaonim and the Rambam. One you find in the writings of the Gaonim. These were the Rosh Hashivas in Baghdad, before the time of the Rishonim. Look at that Muslim empire. Let's go back a little bit. Go back one more. Yeah. Here's the Arab Empire. Look what they conquered in a few years. It's amazing, right? They were in Arabia, sand jockeys, and then that's how everybody looked at them. Then they took over the whole world, so they had the last laugh. So the first capital was Damascus, the second one was right there, smack in the belly button of the empire, where I'm pointing right now in Baghdad. That's in the vicinity of the historic yeshivas of Surah and Pumbedisa, who, before too long, relocated to Baghdad, where they were for hundreds of years, because that's where the money was. The rich Jewish bankers and things like that. Now, let's get one thing straight. The Gaonim, the yeshivas, they owned the Talmud. They knew the Gemara better than the Rishonim. These are the big, big people. And Jews used to write them questions from all over the world, called Shuvas HaGaonim, the response of the Gaonim. And one of the things they asked him was about meanings of the Talmud and all that sort of thing, Gemara. But other things they asked him were what we would call Agadat HaNashkafa, questions of theology or belief. And you already see, particularly in the 900s, a fair number of questions addressed to the Gonim from all over the place. When is the Mashiach coming? What's it going to be like exactly? Because we read the Bible, we read the Talmud, we're all confused. And Sadi Gaon, you've heard of him, who was the Rosh Ibn Surah, and he died in 942, so, in the early 900s, wrote a famous philosophy book, Sefer Emunos B'Deos, in which he has a whole chapter in which he describes what he predicts. Now, he's not saying he knows, but he predicts to be the Messianic process, which is pretty wild. And it's more or less the one that's out there, especially the popular edition. And Rav Hai Gaon, a little bit later, these are famous people of that time, lays it out in a famous responsum that I have an English précis of from my favorite heretic. And listen to this. It's 2 paragraphs. So this is what he says in Aramaic, but this is what it says in English. And Rav Hai says, people want to know, what's it going to be like the Mashiach side? First, he says, the Mashiach ben Yosef, together with a number of his followers, will conquer Jerusalem and proclaim himself king of Israel. The majority of the Jews in the diaspora will remain unconvinced that the end of days is near. When the Goyim, the nations of the world, hear that the Jews now have a king, they will drive the Jews out of their cities, questioning the loyalty to their own realm now that the Jews have a kingdom of their own. Many Jews will be compelled to flee for safety to the desert surrounding their former places of residence. There they will dwell in tents and suffer severe deprivations. So great will be their sufferings that many will abandon the Jewish religion. The anti-Messiah Armilus, in other words, a nemesis, an evil prince named Armilus, will then attract a great following by means of magical powers that are his, and he will succeed in his plan to murder the Mashiach ben Yosef. From this, further acts of apostasy will result. In other words, so great will be the shock at the killing of the Mashiach ben Yosef that many Jews will abandon the Jewish religion. Only the most faithful will remain loyal to Judaism, and then then they will get what they call the Chevle Mashiach. Then they'll get the hard times, okay, of which the rabbis speak. But they will cry out to God in their trouble, and God will heed their cry. Eliyahu Hanavi will then appear to the Jews in the desert. He'll be followed by Mashiach ben David, who will bring back from the dead the Mashiach ben Yosef, so the Mashiach ben David can do Tchias HaMesim, can revive the dead. This resurrection will be the first of many miracles the Mashiach will perform. The Mashiach will then reign in Yerushalayim, where the Jews from the desert will come to live in safety and tranquility for many days, planting vineyards and building homes in a rich Israel. But then comes Gog and Magog. Gog, hearing of the fame of the Mashiach, will raise a mighty army for an attack on Jerusalem. Gog and his army will be defeated, God visiting terrible calamities upon them. In order to appease the Mashiach, the nations will bring gifts to Israel. All the Jews of the world will then come to Jerusalem, some of them by miraculous means, until only the dead will remain behind in the diaspora. Then, Tikab Shefer Gadol Cherusenu, the great trumpet will be sounded, and the dead will rise from their graves. At first, the risen dead will have the form that was theirs at the time of their death, meaning people are going to come back what they look like at the time they died. This is, those who died as old men will rise as old men, and cripples as cripples, in order to establish their identity, and then God will heal them. And they will all become young and whole in body. 7 shepherds will lead them. Adam, Shes, Methuselah, Avram, Yaakov, Moshe, and David, and 8 princes. Yishai, Shaul, Shmuel, Amos, Zephaniah, Chizkiah, Eliyahu, and the Mashiach. Which of the dead will be resurrected? Only those who were either righteous all their lives, or did teshuvah, repented their sins before their death. The resurrected dead will be shown how to rebuild the temple, although others say, he says, that the new temple will come down complete from heaven. All Jews, as well as their male and female slaves, will then become prophets. Remember that when we get to Shabtai Tzvi. All Jews, including their slaves, will become prophets. All the nations still alive will be converted to Judaism. Here it is. All the nations converted to Judaism, and will go to the house of the God of Jacob. Ki mitzion teitzi Torah, udvar Hashem Yerushalayim. When the nations come to Mashiach, he will order them to stop making war with one another. All the wild animals will be banished from the Holy Land. As for people still alive when the Mashiach comes and who thus never to suffer the death decreed for all mankind, they will live to a ripe old age but eventually die. No one will die young, however, in that blessed age. Death will ultimately be destroyed forever. Eventually, there will be no more death. those who died during the Messianic age will be resurrected to live for Olam Haba, forever. And then the Shekhinah will come down and rest on the temple, appearing as a great column of fire, reaching from the earth to the heaven, and so bright that the light of the sun and the moon will be dimmed. The heavens and the earth will appear as if they were new, as if the old heaven and earth had been utterly transformed. Some say that this state of affairs will last 7,000 years, have elapsed from Brias Olam. Others say it will last for many, many thousands of years. But eventually, the heavens and the earth will come to an end. The dead who have been resurrected will enter Olam Haba. God will create a new heaven and a new earth. In the world to come, the righteous will live forever. I bet you most of you have never heard that. But that's what was out there. And I'll say this. Now, how do you get this? The answer, I'm not trying to be funny about this. If you put this pasuk here like this, and you put that pasuk there, and maybe some of you recognize some of these things in the various prophecies that you read in Haftorah, Yeshaya, Yirmiyah, Yecheskel, and so forth. We have these. The only thing is, Rav Sadigon, Rav Haigon, people like that, they say this applies to stage 1, this applies to stage 2, and there are other things out there from Gemaras, and this was out there. And by the way, this is the elites saying this, although we do know about the Gaonim, when it comes to talking about Hashkafa and Agarata, they say one thing to the public and have another thing for themselves. We have secret letters from them, in which they say when you talk about Hashkafa matters, for the public, dumb it down, because the public can't handle certain things. But nevertheless, this is what they put out there. They construct narratives, they make predictions. I have a wonderful book here from Sarachek, Doctrine and Messiah in Medieval Jewish Literature, 1932, where he must have been a dissertation or something, where he goes through all the famous Rishonim, Rashi, Rambam, Ramban, Sadigon, Barbanel, and all that, and each one when he predicted Mashiach coming. Because everybody made a prediction. Not that they knew, they say, we're not faking here, not that they knew, but they say, if you put the Pesukim in Daniel this way, and the Pasuk this way, and do the Gematria here and here, each one. So, Rav Sadigon, for example, who died in 1942, his calculation, without giving you the details, is that the Mashiach will come in 965, which of course did not happen. Rashi, I remember, said the Mashiach is coming in 1305. The Barbanel happened from memory of 1507 or something like that. The Malbim, 1927. Okay? But these are all guesses. They're the first ones to say, we don't know. Best one is the Rambam, when the Rambam says it's an outrage for it. It says this in the Geras Tema. He says it's an outrage for people to make predictions about Mashiach. Chazal say, Tipach atzmo shamachashve kitzim, that those who try to calculate the future, their bones should be blasted. It's a one-way ticket to perdition. In my family, it's 1216. You understand? Based on the gematrias with Bilam. So in other words, everybody had a tradition, and usually it's 50 years from where you are now. So if I was making a prediction along those lines, I would say Mashiach will come about 2050. I don't know, something generally along those lines. Whatever the case is, you see that there certainly was a vivid apocalyptic narrative. When I say apocalyptic, I mean that the idea is that Mashiach is coming. It's not going to be a nicey situation. It's war, it's violence, it's Gog and Magog, it's apostasy, it's death, it's the killing of one of the Mashiachs. There's a lot of violence associated with it, and that sure is what you get in Daniel and many of the other places, no question about it. Now, we know that in the Middle Ages, there's some famous pretenders. There's David Alroy in Persia, and others who claim to be Mashiach and raised armies. Listen closely. The false messiahs constitute a big physical danger for the Jews. Like this guy, David Alroy, for example. There was a guy in Persia, and he says, I'm the Mashiach, and he got together an army of a few thousand men. The king of Persia said like this, if you guys would take this seriously, that means there's a Jewish revolt against me. We'll kill all the Jews. And the Jews had to persuade him to abandon the whole thing and sort of give himself up, whatever. You get what I'm saying? It's not America where you can walk down the street and say whatever you want, and it's freedom of speech. You go around saying, I'm the king of the Jews, and I'm kicking the Goyim out, taking over. If the government really thinks the Jews are behind this, you're putting them in terrible peril. The great figure that emerges next, who dominates for a long time conversations about Messianism, is the Rambam, who is not objective, or and those don't come to this issue in a purely, what shall I say, ivory tower way. Because the Rambam writes in his many writings of experiences that he had with false messiahs, and they always screwed up. And if you know who the Rambam was, he was born in Spain. In the last 15 or 20 years, when it was the good Muslims, and then, I forget, 16, 17, 18 years old, something like that, the Almohads, the bad Muslims, took over, like you call today the ISIS, something like that. And all of a sudden, Judaism was prohibited, and it was a big problem. Many Jews died for the faith, many fled, many semi-converted, the Rambam himself had to run around and fake out. It was a really hard time. And he says, in the Geras Tema, he says, when I was young, there was a guy in Cordoba, supposed to be learned, and he came with predictions based on astrology and astronomy and psukim, that in the year, 1150 or something like that, the Mashiach is going to come. Not only the Mashiach didn't come, that's when the bad Muslims took over. So not only was a Paul Yeshua, it was the opposite. Caused great destruction, which means that God was showing him the whole world what a big liar and idiot he was. You see? Moreover, when the Rambam came to Egypt, and he had to flee and fake him out and pretend to be a Muslim and all that. So when the Rambam eventually, and he was in Morocco, and then he later on moved to Israel, and he ended up in Egypt. When he ended up in Egypt, it was a time when a lot of wars were going with the Crusades, and in Egypt there was a large Jewish community, and the Jews used to pay their taxes to the Jewish community, and then they paid that to the king, to the sultan. And so whoever's in charge of the taxes, you get a little bit sticky fingers over there, you can make off quite well. And consequently, there were Jewish community leaders who wanted to grab the power. And a real jerk named Zuta, and he had a grand name, but Zuta means a small guy, idiot. And I forget what his real name was. And he was able to persuade the Sultan that he should be the Nagid, the chief Jew. And when he got the power, he tortured all the other Jews. And he got so full, this is the shul president gone wild, you understand? He says, right? He says, it got so much to power because he had Gaisha guards that worked for him. The king gave him guards to collect the taxes. They declare himself the Mashiach. See? And he said, if you don't bow down and kiss my shoes, I mean this, and things like this, I'll get you killed, I'll get you in trouble. And it's a long story, and this is a not so well-known part of the Rambam's biography. When he came there, he played an important role in deposing this guy, although the guy's son then had the Rambam knocked out. And then another guy came in and persuaded Saladin to restore the Rambam. That's why he was the Nagid. The Rambam eventually replaced this guy as the top dog Jew, the number one guy. No, the Rambam was in charge of all the money. I don't know if you know that. After 1188 or 1189, all the tax money went to his hands. He was honest, So, and that's one of the reasons, incidentally, that he stopped writing books. If you know how the Rambam works, until around 1190 or so, he wrote his Sfarim. And after that, he lived another 15 years, he didn't write anything. And the reason is because Tzarchei Tzibur took over the whole time, and it needs to be attended to. So the Jewish people are the sufferers, because if you know the writings of the Rambam, he promised to write many interesting works, and he never got around to it. So here's somebody who had first-hand experience with the phenomenon of megalomanias and false messiahs. Moreover, it's very famous that when he was in Egypt, his fame spread, and Yemen, which is not that far away from Egypt, underwent a kind of an ISIS-type persecution at that time. And the Jews of Yemen, heard about the Rambam and wrote him a letter saying, what should we do in this situation? And he composed his very famous Geras Tema, the episode to the Jews of Yemen, in Judeo-Arabic, in which he called Muhammad an idiot and things like this. He really took his life in his hands, if anybody told on him. Yes, he does. And at great length he calls him idiot and an epileptic. It's quite that's the most interesting, in my opinion, the most interesting thing the Rambam wrote, the Geras Tema. And he talks about the fact over there that in response to the terrible persecutions, first of all, a lot of Jews in Yemen are converting to Islam under the terrible pressure. And then, among those who aren't, there's a guy who's stepping forth and saying, this is Mashiach's side, that's the terrible suffering we're going. When ich bin the Mashiach, I'm the Mashiach. You understand? And he had all these claims, and he dashed him psukim to prove his point. And what do we do about this? And the Rambam, first of all, says, stay normal. It's hard. It's a very interesting letter. Stay normal, middle of the road. Don't go nuts. Okay? Chazak yadayim koshlos ubirchos something amiso. Like it says in Amos. Keep your hands and your knees from buckling. Chazak yadayim koshlos ubirchos amiso. I forget how it goes. Anyway, and he goes on and he talks at great length about the subject of the Mashiach and all the rest of it, which should take us too far afield to go in here. For time reasons, but very interesting. And one of the things, and I'm going to read you part of this now, one of the things he says is, don't believe anybody says Mashiach because he's full of baloney. Right? And one of the things he says about there, at great length, is the following. I'm reading a translation from the Arabic. Now you wrote to me about the predicted time at the end. People are telling me, no, this is not it. This is something else. Yeah, that's right. Just leave it at that. He says, that you write to me about the predict time of the end, that, this guy says, I can prove to you that 1181 or whatever year he was in is the year, because if you take the pasuk, turn it backwards, and spin it upside down 4 times, it comes out to that. Umashabir of Sadia Behem, and the Sadigon himself also indulged in the Messianic speculation. Tchilas Mashiach Ladas, my friends, he says to the Jews in Yemen, first thing you have to understand is that when the Mashiach is coming, it's not possible for anybody to know, which is quite a statement. I say the word no. It's not possible for anybody to know. Because in the end of Daniel, the angel says to Daniel, no one will figure it out. That's what he says. The book is sealed. Let many speculate, he says. He showed it to Rabbi Arba Das. Let many speculate, but no one will get it right. He says, the fact that many speculate is a prediction that's in the book of Daniel, where he says, he showed to Rabbi Arba Das, that many will speculate, but they'll all be wrong. Okay? And so forth. V'da. And then he makes the point rhetorically. Even the predicted end that was explicitly spelled out in the Chumash, everybody got it wrong. It's about the 400 years after which the Jews would leave Egypt. You all know that at the bris mitzvah of Besarim, God tells Avram, your children will be slaves for 400 years, and then they'll leave. But nobody knew when the 400 years was. Nobody knew what it was, and everybody had different opinions and doubts in those centuries. Many thought, and this is the simplest way, 400 years in Egypt. From the time that Yaakov arrived in Egypt, there would have to be another 400 years. Like we do in Pesach in the Haggadah, 190, an extra to this, right? 400 years. And others said, no, you have to start counting, you have to start counting the 400 years from the time Pharaoh actually enslaved them, which is 70 years after Yaakov showed up in Egypt. And some people thought that the 400 years counts from the bris mitzvah of Besarim, when Avram said these words when God said these words to Abraham. And indeed, we know about the tribe of Ephraim, it's famous, that when 400 years from the bris mitzvah was over, there were Jews who left, even though they weren't supposed to. They left 30 years too early. They were absolutely convinced that this is it. So in other words, we don't know what happened, but a messianic figure appeared among the tribe of Ephraim, so let's go. And what happened was they were all wiped out, and the survivors suffered an increase in the servitude. When Pharaoh says double the bricks and the straw and all the rest of it, that's the kind of thing that was going on in the 30 years after some Jews left. So he puts a little spin on the story over here, that they increased the slavery because they saw some try to leave. He says that's what Chazal tell us. In other words, and they're referred to in Tehillim. The real answer, which was what? 400 years from the birth of Yitzchak. Nobody got that right. The actual meaning of the pasuk, without going into details, was from the birth of Yitzchak, and nobody knew until Moshe showed up and started to do things. Moshe didn't say like this, Ich bin der Mashiach. He said, watch this. That's a different story. You see? That's a different story. All the others just said like this, believe in me. Moshe didn't come and say, believe in me. From day one, he started doing things. The Rambam in this letter to Yemen says, so if that's true, of that time when they at least had a fixed number, they knew 400 years, so we don't have any idea how long this one's supposed to live. If a fixed time period, what do you call it, terminus aquam, right? They knew when it's going to be over, and they got all that wrong. Then how much more so the current Golus, which was so terrifying in its longevity that the prophets all wondered all about it, and so on and so forth. And therefore the Chacham say, don't try to even figure it out. So you see over here that the Rambam was utterly opposed because he says all but one, who claim to be Messianic figures, literally don't know what they're talking about. The most they're doing guessing. They cannot know. Only a Moshe knew. You show me a guy who's like a Moshe, then we'll talk. And you'll see that these become, codified in his book. So basically, the Rambam was quite aware of the danger of false Messianic figures. He understood the problems of trying to do these calculation shtick. How many years in Daniel? Daniel says it'll be Erev Boker Alpayim Shloshma, 1,300 mornings and evenings, whatever that means, or 70 weeks, or from 1290 to 1335. You really think you're going to know? And basically, the Rambam is indicating over here that he has no time for the Olam Golam, the masses or asses kind of Messianism. The Olam is always dumb, and don't fall for anything, and don't be like that. The Rambam composed these ideas over many decades, and finally, as you know, he put all these ideas of his into the Mission of Torah when he composed it. But in a mature Hebrew, very carefully edited form. That's what the Mission of Torah is. Okay? What you see over there, just take it from me for now. So when you see these hashkava type things, if you know from his earlier writings, he writes about it at great length, but then he chunks it down like an Hilchos Tshuva and place like that into a well-edited final draft by the time you get to the Mission of Torah. And what does he do when he finally gets over there? He lays out an anti-Gaonic position, which is very clear. And I'm sure many of you have seen this at one time or another, but here you have on the screen in front of you. This is at the very end of the Mishnah Torah. And remember, the Mishnah Torah, the Rambam really wrote, you're going to laugh at what I'm about to say, the Rambam says he wrote it for the dumb masses. The Talmidei Chacham don't need a Mishnah Torah, he says. For the regular people, you'll have a Chumash, you'll have my book, you'll know what to do. He wasn't talking about the big scholars and all that who can do it themselves. Of course they do. But for the regular person out there, they got so many things wrong. Listen, you could do a lot worse than go by Shittas Rambam. You know what I mean? You're always on good ground if you go Shittas Rambam. Not everybody. You could do a lot worse. So that's what that is. And he lays out there at the end of the book, 14 volumes, right? Yad HaChazaka. At the very end of the 14 volumes, he has 2 chapters where he's devoted to the Messianic idea, in which he clearly lays out a very rational and very skeptical approach to Mashiach, where he says, as you see in front of you, that the Mashiach is a figure with a litmus test. Like I said, they didn't believe Moshe because he says I'm Mashiach. They believe Moshe because he started to do things. So in the future, when some Mashiach comes forward and says I'm a Moshe, it's not like you got to believe me because I'm a Hasidic Rebbe or something like that. You got to believe me? Show. So he said the Mashiach is the person who's going to restore the Malchus based on Yoshna, like we would say today, the state of Israel in a from way, a Torah way. HaMashiach Shana Bona HaMikdash, Mekabes Nitcha Yisrael, Chozu Kol Mishvatim Keshem Mikodem. You show me a guy today who can get the Arabs the heck out of Jerusalem and out of Israel and build a base on Mikdash and get away with it. Hats off to you. You're the Mashiach. But if you don't do it, shut up. No? If you don't do it, then don't tell me anything. Makriva karbonos shemitah v'yel mitzvah somewhere b'Torah. This is a Mashiach. And all the other stuff is just talk. And we know, talk without deeds, what that means throughout Jewish history is a liar. Now you find me a guy like that and who doesn't believe in that, who doesn't expect that, he is denying the Chumash, and he has a whole bunch of psukim to back it up there, because many people said, where does it say the Messianic idea in the Bible? And the Rambam, I'm sure as you know, in the Ani Mamin says it's one of the 13 principles, so where do you get it from? So he assembles psukim over there. He also says, Alpha Parshas Bilam, in today's Parsha, this week's Parsha, he talks about the Mashiach Rishon, Mashiach Sheni, and I'm not going to, go and read it all. And I'll skip over to 3, Halacha 3. Al Yal Al Daika. Now here he's speaking very specifically against the Gaonim, because they said the Mashiach is going to fly through the air, do Tchias HaMesim, heal the sick, and do amazing miracles, open the ground, like that. And he says, Al Yal Al Daika Melch Mashiach Tzarech Lasos Emosim. It's not true. The Mashiach is not somebody who has to do miracles. He's not a superhuman. I'll repeat, he's not a superhuman. Whoa. Right? He says, like the fools say. Well, we just saw some of the people who wrote it were some pretty distinguished scholars. He said, but all that is junk. Ain't a davar came. Rabbi Kiva Chacham God Mechacham Mishnah Yonosi Kel Shel Koziva Hamelech for Yomer Lov Shu Melech Mashiach the Chacham Dor Shel Mashiach Shnei Bavonos. Because of the example of Bar Kochba. Rabbi Kiva backed Bar Kochba, and as far as the Rambam is concerned, Bar Kochba was a great general, like a Judah Maccabee type. Right? He didn't do any miracles. He organized the Jews, and he looked like he was getting somewhere at the beginning. He was defeating the Romans. Okay. And if he would defeat the Romans and rebuild Jerusalem based on English, okay. He didn't do it. He got killed. He got killed, so he wasn't the right guy. But he says over here that they didn't say do miracles, fly through the air, revive the dead, and all the rest of it. Now, I cannot forbear, but share, if you know the Ravid, this is not exactly true. The Rambam, when he constructs these things, cut and paste. You always have to. Every Rishon does this because there's so many contradictory statements in the Agadah throughout the Talmud and Medrash. She cuts and pastes. So there is a place in the Gemara where it says, it's what I talked about last year in Sanhedrin, where it says they went to the Mashiach and they said to Bar Kochba rather, and they said, "Can you smell Harichev Baruch HaMishpat? Can you smell who's right and wrong in a court case? Meaning, can you just discern by looking at them?" And he couldn't, so they killed him. So it sounds like they demanded a miracle from him. So this has been a big product of research and Farshim and the Rambam and all the rest of it. Here, Shalom, this is one you can go into. And I'm serious. And, did he have the Girsa or not, all the rest of it. But he clearly is saying, I don't know what that's all about. Bar Kochba was, as I say before, a Judah Maccabee type. He was, if I can use this expression, Lahavdoi says, imagine a from Moshe Dayan, something like that, right? From God, victorious leader, kick the Arabs out, recover Jerusalem for us, build the Beis HaMikdash thing, and make the world like it. Like Truman used to say. You do that, that's a Mashiach. Because it is. You see? You don't do that, don't talk. And anyway, the Ram goes on to say, the Torah is a normal document, not a crazy document. Torah doesn't change up and down, and you can't add new ideas. These ideas about a Mashiach being a superhuman in the Torah. Anyone who tries to come up with new stories of eschatology and apocalyptics, which is these messianic sort of things, and which there are many midrashim over there. The Ram said these are Rishon and Apikursim, which is quite a statement. Okay, so he knew what's out there, and he knew what the masses believe. And he knew all the stuff, but that's the biography of the Rambam if you know anything about him at all. He spent all his life saying, the trouble is the Jewish people don't understand Judaism. Therefore, consider what I'm about to tell you. The Rambam was a genius. If he wanted to, he could write Chaim Brisker, correct? He could do unbelievable Chedushim and all that stuff that would blow people away, because he was a genius. And he didn't do that. 95% of what he did is to explain the ABCs of Judaism. All of his writings are popular in nature. Almost all of his writings are popular in nature. Why did he do that? He said this is his sense of achrayas, of responsibility for the Jewish people. They don't have Judaism right. I'm going to at least put on paper they should have the Judaism right. And one of the features that they have read is about Mashiach, and I'm going to try to get it down there. Mashiach is not some guy, from a movie flying through the air. Mashiach is a great individual. We define his greatness as being from and this, but mainly, can you deliver? Like I said before, and to put it in terms of nowadays, and here we are about to start the 3 weeks. You show me somebody that can get the Arabs out of Jerusalem. You show me figure some way to get the Arabs out of Israel. He gets my vote. You understand? And there you have it. V'imyamin melch. Therefore, the Rambam goes on to say, and look how long he is in this. Imyamin melch mi beis David hoga b'tar rozik Mrs. David Ovid. You find me a guy who's from. Okay, number one, and he comes from David Melch. He's descended. He has the right yichus. And he's hoga b'Torah v'osik Mrs. David. So he learns and he does mitzvahs and all the rest of it. Torah shebiksav Torah shebabeh. He should not be a Karaite. Okay? V'Yakov kol Yisrael leich b'chazid bidko. And if he is like a one-man NCSY, he can get everybody to become religious Shomer Shabbos. He's a very charismatic person, and he can get the whole Jewish people to do the right thing. V'yilcham milchamas Hashem. And he can fight the battles of the Lord. Remember that phrase, because that's very enigmatic. I know what the Rambam meant, which means he'll kick the Arabs out. And anybody tries to mess with us, he'll beat them off. But he doesn't use those words clearly. He said he will fight the Milchamas Hashem, the battles of the Lord. Hareze b'cheska Mashiach. That guy has a pretty good claim to be Mashiach. He has the right yichus, he has the right frumkai, he has the right, what should I say, charisma. Im also v'tzliach v'nitzach kol u'mashav b'tzvivov. And if he can, like I say, if he can beat the Arabs, and they get Obama to go along, Ubana Migdashim come and get us to rebuild the temple, but Kabbalah Nechli Yisrael and moved all the Jews to Israel. How is the Mashiach body? That is the Mashiach. So in other words, there's a litmus test. There's a checklist if I can do it. It's empirically verifiable. You claim Mashiach, I got no problem with it. Now show me what you can do. As soon as they start to say, leave the room. Okay? If the guy tried and got killed, then he wasn't a Mashiach. He may have been a courageous and heroic individual. Right? He wasn't a Mashiach. And it was a nisayon, because it says in the book of Daniel, it's predicted in the book of Daniel that there will be many tests that will come down the line. Meaning, long ago, this was written in the Torah, in the Bible, that there will be false situations to test the credulous. Okay? And the maskilim will be nichshal. There's even people who are educated and consider themselves scholars will stumble. They shouldn't feel so arrogant like they really understand what's going on in the Torah, because you don't. And you'll get egg all over your face. All of this, of course, exactly happens in Shabtai Tzvi, as we all know. Big rabbis and others. And so he said that's what it is. Now, I'm going to read you from, does he have in here? Yeah. This is the censored part of the Rambam that they've only recently put back in the text. There was the Catholic Church censored in the Middle Ages. Af Yeshua Notzri, even Jesus, Shedima Shia Mashiach B'nerga Bezdin, who claimed to be Mashiach and was killed in Bezdin, according to the one, he was also predicting in the book of Daniel, that there'll be bad Jews who will try to hold up visions, and they will stumble. And you can't get worse than him, because instead of Mashiach helping the Jews, rebuilding Israel, rebuilding the temple, bringing all the Jews from all over the world in there, fixing up Yiddishkeit, all the rest of it, he did the opposite. And it's caused the opposite. So he's anti-Mashiach, if you want to get down to it. Now, by the way, this is the Rambam's version of the Jesus story. It's not the historical version. This is the one that he comes through. And different Rishonim have completely different versions of the Yeshu story. I mean, I just want you to know that. Right? There's no one narrative. It's part of the fact that we don't have a theology. And the Ram goes on to say we can't figure out God's ways. As the prophet says, his thoughts are not our thoughts. He's above us. This whole business with Christianity and Islam, with this Jesus guy and then the Muslim guy who came up after him, the Ishmaelite, And why are they so powerful and rule the world? And here they are in 2015. It's still going on. It's all part of what he calls a historical evolution. The God is little by little bringing mankind towards a certain monotheism. Okay? Thanks to the rise of Christianity and thanks to the rise of Islam, everybody in the world, or is his world, is talking about the Old Testament, is talking about the Talmud and the predictions. Of course, the Christians are interpreting it their way. The Muslims, of course, obviously are interpreting it their way. But in the pagan world, like for example, we went to China today. You said there's a Mashiach. They don't know what that means, right? It's completely out of their cultural context. Go to India, Japan. They don't need anything. But if you go to Europe, you go to North Africa, you go to the Middle East, and places like that, they instantly know what this is all about. And the monotheistic principles of Judaism and the Messianic idea have spread all over the world to the faraway islands, he says. And they discuss it in great detail. But as he gets in the very end of this paragraph, when the real Mashiach comes, you see what he is made out of, then they'll all recognize their mistake because they're already holding in the Indian, so to speak. They will have already thought in great detail about what the Messiah concept is. They'll just say, we were wrong. This is his take on the subject. And then he goes on to hammer the point home in the last chapter of the book. And I'm doing this at length because this becomes the most well-known presentation of Messianic idea in Judaism, simply because the Rambam's book got out there a lot more than the Chuvas Gaonim, and still do, which is exactly what he wanted. And he goes on to say, Al Yal Alei, don't even think for a moment, that things will change in the Messianic era. That to be like Tchias HaMesim as before, and to be miracles, and it'll rain money and things like that. Oh yes, Shem Chiddush Ma'aseh Bereishis, that some change in natural order. Olam Kiminhago Noeg. Things will be the same they are now. What do you do with the prophecies? Like in Isaiah, that the lion will lie down with the lamb. In the natural order, lions eat lambs. So what does it mean? No, mashal b'chi, that doesn't mean it literally. It's just a mashal. It's this expression saying, now you're going to laugh at what I'm about to say, there'll be peace in the Middle East. Right? And then the lion will lie down with the lamb. The Jews will be a lamb. I get it. Yeah, I know. It's easier to believe the lion will lie down with the lamb than there'll be peace in the Middle East. I get it. But that's what it means. Suppose tomorrow, let's just pretend. Suppose tomorrow the Arabs totally change their mind and say, let's make a peace in Israel and move Mikana Haba. The lion would be lying down with the lamb. Because we're the weak ones. And they're not going to bother us. And no one does Gzeila and all the rest of it. Instead, they would concentrate on building a better world. It would make sense for me. And then the prophecies that, nation will not fight nation, and they'll instead spend the money on cancer research. Why not? But this is the meaning of the phrase. It doesn't mean literally. Okay? That's the way it goes with all these verses that discuss the Messianic era. They're not literal. Mashal hain. And don't ask me, he says, what the mashal is, because we'll only know when it happens. So again and again, he's hammering home the point that those who talk about don't know what they're talking about. And only when the time comes will they know what they're talking about. And they'll see in retrospect what the meaning is. The same way in the time of Moshe Rabbeinu, they only knew when the 400 years are over, after it's all over. And when somebody tells you, no, it's this way, and the Zohar says this, and the Pasuk means that, and all the rest of it, and this guy did a miracle, or whatever it is, whether you're talking about in Europe or America or anywhere else, the Rambam said they literally don't know what they're talking about. Only when it happens will they know what they're talking about. And it's a famous statement, although it's only one of many. The Rambam, as they say, cuts and pastes. So he says, Shmuel says in the Gemara that the only difference in the Messianic era now will be there'll be an independent and free and totally at peace state of Israel. Shibba Malchus. Get it? If you had a state of Israel, the Arabs didn't bother anybody, and we just had as much peace as Luxembourg, that'd be Mashiach time, according to Shmuel, and it ain't there by a long shot. What do you do with the fact that in the Bible they go through such great lengths to describe this in detail? It appears, he said, I don't know for sure because you can't. It appears that there'll be a Gog and Magog, there'll be some kind of World War III, but maybe it'll be intellectual, Seems like some prophet, a prophet I mean that. Remember that in the Shabtai, a real prophet will arise before the Gog and Magog. Maybe. And the whole purpose that we know of Eli Navi will be not to do miracles, but hey, to try to restore family harmony among the Jewish people, which is the biggest miracle that will never happen. And so, we don't know. Somebody says I got it wrong, that it's out of order, the Mashiach Elio come first. It doesn't matter, he says. Nobody will know for sure until it happens. Get that straight. So notice, whenever people talk about this, pinch yourself twice. The prophets didn't get it clear. They say in the prophetic books, we don't have it clear. Daniel is told by the angel at the end of the book, Stumim v'chasumim. You have a general idea, but you don't see it clearly. So how can me standing here today say I can't even see it clearly? Even the Chazal don't have a tradition when it comes to this. They're guessing. They're guessing when they read the verses over there. Now, they're greater people than us, so Rabbi Akiva's guess is more important than my guess, but at the end of the day, it's a guess. Well, that's exactly why, as I started with my remarks tonight, you have differences of opinion. When I got at the question, there's a radical difference of opinion on what it's going to be like. Because nobody knows. None of this matters. Right? What matters is believe in God, keep Shabbos, Kashrus, Tana Shabbat, wait for Mashiach, and all that stuff. That matters. Don't get too involved in this agadatos. And don't get involved in these matters sorts of things, he says. Don't really make them the main part of your religion. Because the road to Messianic speculation does not lead to Avas Hashem, and it doesn't lead to Yiras Hashem, which is quite a statement. Okay? Instead, you get it wrapped up in Messianic fantasies. It does not lead to Avas Hashem, it doesn't lead to Yiras Hashem. Keeps him, and don't try to figure out when it's coming out over there. And, I'll just skip to the last part, and since the hour's late, maybe we'll close it down over here just in another 2 minutes. But he goes on to say like this, and anyway, what do you need the Mashiach for? Right? The Rambam is an intellectual. I'm asking a good question. What do you need the Mashiach for? He says, he says, the reason that Jews, the sages, yearn for the time of Mashiach, we don't have any domination rule the world. Do I want to rule South America? Do I want to rule Southeast Asia, Africa? What do you want it for? Not to beat up the Goyim. What do you want? That's not a lot. What do you want it for? And not to get credit from the United Nations. We don't need them if they just leave us alone. And not to live a life of party and material prosperity. Because we already have that in America, for example. But the Jews are menucha and be able to devote themselves to the studying of higher spirituality. That's what he says. And nobody will bother them. In order to, through, this is Maimonidean philosophy, through improving the soul, you get a better afterlife. You understand? Because only one to connect with the active intellect really gets to heaven. But the point is, whatever it is, he says, ultimately, what's it all about? It's all about just leave us alone. The problem with Israel, Israel's not like trying to take over the Middle East. They don't want it. Right? Raise your hands if you think Egypt should take over Egypt. Right? Raise your hand if you think Israel should even take over Jordan or something. Leave them. Keep them away. Stay out of my property, right? I don't want to do that. I want to do myself. But what do I want for? To eat 3 meals a day? I eat 3 meals a day. So what do you want to do? So nobody will bother Jewish people. They can devote themselves to higher things. And in the Messianic era, the Rambam, who could not have imagined our lives today, because we live much better than he's imagining the Messianic era. He's saying there'll be no wars and kin and tachlis, Tovim Mishpas Harbi, be economic prosperity, Chodam Zum'afar, and all the dainties will be all over the place. I'll tell you again, if the Rambam ever walked into the supermarket today, he said, this can't be. You understand? This is a fantasy. People try to actually know who God is, which is the highest human aspiration. And they'll understand deep and hidden things in the Torah, as it says, that the world will be filled with the knowledge of the Lord, as the waters of the ocean cover that. Meaning, it's not about politics, not about war. So what exactly you want the Mashiach for? You see? So get rid of this business of a supernatural individual, other individual, the Tchias HaMesim, as I said before, and all the other things to the Pesukim, and nobody knows what those Pesukim are. The Rambam, in other words, therefore laid out more clearly than anyone else a non-mystical, although this is profoundly mystical, but you understand what I mean when I say that, a non-mystical conception of the Messianic process as a Messianic figure. And the Rambam's book were the most reprinted in the Middle Ages, obviously. The other opinions, nevertheless, were there sub rosa and remained among the Jewish masses for many centuries. The other version that I just told you for, and pop up from time to time. And therefore you have this split between the elite conceptions and the mass conceptions. The Rambam leaves, and I leave with this tonight, the first round of Messianism is just, but watch out. Understand? The key and most important element of the Rambam's conception of the Mashiach is its empirical nature. You understand? Its empirical nature. Somebody says Mashiach, totepes. Right? You say Mashiach, so do something. Show you are. If you can't show you are, that's a demonstration that you're not. And when a person says, no, I'm going to do it in a different way, and if you don't believe me, you're an unbeliever, and all the rest of it, I'm saying, show me something, right? Show me something. I'll conclude tonight, with a funny story, and that is, it just came to my mind. And it used to be Rabbi Maimon, the head of Mizrahi in Israel. He was best friends with Ben Gurion. Ben Gurion was atheist. And so Maimon had a son-in-law, Yitzhak Raphael, who was a big macher, the Moser of Cook, if anybody's old enough to remember. And Yitzhak, who was a minister of religion, Yitzhak Raphael went to his father-in-law, and he said, Rabbi Maimon, Shver, you're not a Mizrahi, you're a Mizrahi. I mean that. You understand? But nevertheless, you're a religious Jew. So how do you understand it? I mean, I know you're a super Zionist, so I know you mean it well, and all the rest. Isn't it weird, after 2,000 years, Ben Gurion, Machal Shabbos, why did God do that? Doesn't it bother you? And he answered, very famously, says, no, Adrab, it had to be that way. He said, what do you mean it had to be that way? He said, if Ben Gurion would be a Shomer Shabbos, and after 2,000 years would found, for the first time, a Jewish homeland state of Israel, and beat up the enemies, he would be the Mashiach. And he's not. Good night.